Sign it, Emily, and try not to cry on the company logo. Grant Calloway said it with a smile, loud enough for the front row to hear and soft enough to pretend it was not cruelty. The gold fountain pen slid across the white linen table like a blade. Behind him, 400 guests in black ties and diamond bracelets waited beneath the chandeliers of the Grand Meridian Hotel, where champagne towers glittered, cameras blinked, and the 25th anniversary gala of Calloway Whitaker Industries was supposed to celebrate one man's impossible rise. Emily Whitaker stood beside the stage with one hand resting on her 8-month pregnant belly and the other curled around a small silver necklace at her throat. She wore a cream maternity dress, plain beside the polished women around her, and the spotlight made her look even paler than she felt. Grant had chosen that moment on purpose. Not in a lawyer's office. Not in private. Here, in front of investors, board members, reporters, and every employee who had been taught to clap when he entered a room. He wanted the divorce papers signed under the same lights that had turned him from a poor apprentice into a millionaire chief executive officer. He wanted witnesses. He wanted humiliation dressed as elegance. "This is unnecessary," Emily whispered, but the microphone near the podium caught just enough of her voice for the first few tables to turn. Grant leaned closer, his navy tuxedo sharp, his white smile colder than the ice in the crystal buckets. "What is unnecessary is dragging this out. You were never part of this company. You were my wife. That position has expired." A few nervous laughs moved through the ballroom, thin and uncomfortable. Then Vanessa Rhodes stepped forward from his right side, wearing a red gown that looked designed for cameras and consequences. She placed a manicured hand on Grant's arm, not like an employee, not like a friend, but like a woman already measuring the curtains in another woman's home. "Emily, darling," Vanessa said, her voice dipped in sugar and poison. "Tonight is about Grant's legacy. Do not make it about your feelings." Legacy. The word struck Emily harder than any insult. Around the room, enormous screens played a tribute video. Grant shaking hands with senators, Grant cutting ribbons at new factories, Grant standing before the first Whitaker research lab, as if he had built it with his own hands. But Emily remembered that lab before his name was ever on the door. She remembered being 9 years old, sitting on the floor while her father, Thomas Whitaker, sketched designs on yellow legal pads and told her that a company was not a building, not a stock price, not a man in a suit. A company was a promise. Grant had stolen the promise and sold it back to the world as genius. The baby shifted beneath Emily's palm, slow and firm, as if reminding her to breathe. She looked down at the pen, then at the divorce papers, then at the company seal stamped in gold across the page. Calloway Whitaker Industries. His name first, her father's name second. That was how thieves wrote history when no one stopped them. Grant lifted the pen and placed it between her fingers. "Be reasonable," he said. "I am offering you a quiet exit. A house in Vermont. Medical support until the baby comes. Enough money to keep you comfortable if you stay out of the way." Emily almost smiled. Comfortable. That was the word men used when they wanted women grateful for cages with better furniture. Before she could answer, the ballroom doors opened at the back with a slow, heavy sound that rolled across the marble floor. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. An older woman with silver hair stepped inside, carrying a brown leather briefcase, the kind that did not belong at a gala unless it carried something more dangerous than money. Emily saw her and felt the room tilt. Margaret Ellis, her father's attorney. A woman Emily had not seen since the funeral. Margaret did not wave. She did not hurry. She only walked down the center aisle while Grant's smile flickered for the first time that night. Vanessa noticed it. The cameras noticed it. Maybe even the guests felt it, that sudden drop in temperature when a lie senses paperwork approaching. Grant tightened his grip around Emily's wrist, still smiling for the room. "Sign," he said through his teeth. Emily looked at the necklace resting against her collarbone, the tiny silver locket her father had given her on her 16th birthday. For years, she thought it was sentimental. A keepsake, the last soft piece of a dead man's love. What Grant did not know was that Margaret had called her that morning with 6 words that changed everything. "Your father left you the key." Emily slowly pulled her hand away from Grant's. The pen fell onto the papers with a small click, but in the silence that followed, it sounded like a verdict. She lifted her chin and looked at the man who had built an empire out of her grief. "No," she said. "One word. Quiet. Clean. Enough to make the first camera zoom in. For one full second, nobody moved. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath with Emily. Then Grant gave a small laugh, the kind powerful men use when they are trying to teach a room how to react. No, he repeated, turning slightly toward the audience as if she had just told a charming joke. Emily, this is not the place for one of your emotional episodes. The word emotional floated through the air and landed exactly where he meant it to land. On her pregnancy. On her silence. On every month she had been too tired to defend herself while he told people she was fragile, confused, overwhelmed, not herself. Vanessa took the cue immediately. She stepped closer to the microphone, her red dress catching the light like a warning flare. Ladies and gentlemen, please forgive the interruption, she said smoothly. Mrs. Calloway has been under tremendous stress. Pregnancy can make even simple decisions feel dramatic. Several faces in the crowd shifted. A few board members looked down at their programs. Others stared at Emily's belly first, then her face, as if trying to decide whether Grant's explanation was easier to believe than the tension unfolding in front of them. Emily saw it all. That was the cruelest part. Grant did not have to shout to erase her. He only had to sound reasonable. Vanessa smiled at her with perfect public kindness. Why do you not step aside, Emily? Tonight is about the future of this company. Future. There it was again. A word stolen from her father's mouth and dressed in Vanessa's perfume. The screens behind them continued playing the tribute video, and now the voiceover praised Grant Calloway as the visionary who transformed a struggling family laboratory into a national manufacturing empire. Black and white photographs appeared on the screen. The original Whitaker building in Albany, the first research team, the first product patent, the old sign above the entrance. The room clapped politely, but Emily could not hear the applause. She saw her father in the corner of one photograph, half cropped out, his sleeves rolled up, his tie loose, his tired smile turned toward a young Grant standing beside him. Back then, Grant had not worn custom tuxedos. He had worn borrowed suits and carried Thomas Whitaker's briefcase. He had called Emily Kiddo and brought her vending machine hot chocolate when she waited after school in the lobby. He had looked harmless. That was how he got close enough to take everything. Vanessa glanced at the screen and let out a soft laugh. It is remarkable, really, she said, tilting her head toward Emily. Some people are born near greatness and still never learn how to carry it. This time the insult was clear enough for the front half of the ballroom to understand. The charity case. The quiet wife. The woman who had been allowed to stand beside the millionaire only because he had been generous enough to keep her there. Emily felt heat rise behind her eyes, but she did not let it become tears. Tears would help them. Tears would fit the story Grant had spent years writing about her. Instead, she pressed her thumb against the edge of the silver locket until the tiny hinge bit into her skin. At the back of the room, Margaret Ellis stopped beside the last row. She opened the brown leather briefcase just enough for Emily to see the dark blue folder inside. The folder had a faded silver seal on the front. Whitaker Holdings Trust. Emily's heart gave one hard beat. Grant noticed where she was looking. His jaw tightened. For the first time, the mask did not slip. It cracked. Security, he said quietly to a staff member near the stage. Please escort that woman out. Margaret did not react. She simply lifted one document from the folder and held it against her chest like a shield. Harold Bennett, the chairman of the board, rose slowly from a table near the center aisle. He was in his 70s, thin, careful, with the tired posture of a man who had survived too many corporate lies by pretending not to see them. But tonight, he looked directly at Margaret, then at Grant. Grant, Harold said, his voice low but carrying. Is there a reason Thomas Whitaker's attorney is being removed from a Whitaker anniversary event? The ballroom changed shape around that sentence. Heads turned. Phones lifted. Reporters near the bar leaned forward. Vanessa's smile froze, still beautiful, suddenly useless. Grant adjusted his cufflinks, buying time. Harold, this is a private domestic matter. Then why, Harold asked, are divorce papers on the presentation table? That was the moment Emily understood something. Grant had counted on her shame. He had counted on her fear of making a scene. He had counted on a pregnant woman choosing peace over truth because peace had always cost her less in the moment. But there are rooms where silence becomes a second theft, and Emily had no more left to give. She stepped to the microphone before Grant could block her. The speakers gave a small breath of static. Every camera turned toward her. The baby moved again, steady beneath her hand. Emily looked at the tribute video, at her father's name reduced to a logo behind Grant's face. And then she looked at the room that had forgotten who built the floor beneath their polished shoes. "Before anyone removes Margaret Ellis," she said, her voice quiet but clear, "I think this company should hear what my father left behind." The name landed in the ballroom like a door opening somewhere underground. Thomas Whitaker. For years, Grant had spoken that name only when it helped him look humble. He called Thomas his mentor in interviews, his guiding light at shareholder breakfasts, the man who gave him one chance and taught him everything about loyalty. But Emily remembered the truth before the speeches polished it clean. She remembered the winter her father died, the hospital hallway that smelled of coffee, rainwater, and antiseptic, and Grant standing beside the vending machines with red eyes that looked almost real. Emily had been 19 then, too young to understand how grief could be used like wet cement, shaped quickly before it hardened. Thomas Whitaker had built his company from a two-car garage behind their old house outside Albany. He was not flashy. He drove the same blue pickup truck for 12 years and kept patent sketches in shoeboxes because he trusted paper more than computers. Grant had arrived at Whitaker Labs as a scholarship intern from Ohio, hungry, polite, brilliant in the way broken men can be brilliant when ambition is the only thing keeping them warm. Thomas gave him work, then responsibility, then access. Emily saw him at family dinners, at holiday parties, at late nights in the lab when her father forgot to come home. Grant knew where the files were. He knew which board members were aging, which suppliers were angry, which accounts were strained. He knew the weak places because Thomas had mistaken hunger for loyalty. After the accident, everything blurred. The funeral, the black umbrellas, the reporters calling Thomas a pioneer, Grant helping Emily into the car as if he were family. He told her there were documents to sign, temporary protections, routine transfers, paperwork to keep the company stable while she finished college and learned how to carry the Whitaker name. "Your father trusted me," he had said, placing the pen in her hand. "Let me protect what he built." She signed because she was grieving. She signed because she was 19. She signed because the man across from her had wept at her father's grave. Within 6 months, Whitaker Labs became Callaway Whitaker Industries. Within a year, Grant was on magazine covers. Within 2 years, Emily was quietly encouraged to step back from business matters for her own good. He said the board was complicated. He said investors did not want instability. He said she had a gentle heart, not a corporate mind. And when they married, people called it romantic. The devoted protege marrying the founder's daughter. A beautiful American success story. No one saw the contract language. No one saw Emily's emails go unanswered. No one saw the way Grant corrected her in meetings until she stopped attending them. No one saw him turn her inheritance into an allowance and call it care. Back in the ballroom, Emily looked at the giant screen where her father's photograph dissolved into Grant's smiling face. It felt obscene. Vanessa shifted near the podium, impatience flashing in her eyes. "This is becoming embarrassing," she said, though her voice had lost its silk. "Your father is gone, Emily." The company moved on. Emily turned toward her. Slowly. Not angry. Not shaking. Just awake. "That is what Grant told everyone," she said. Margaret Ellis began walking again, down the center aisle, each step measured against the soft panic spreading through the room. The blue folder in her hands seemed to pull every light toward it. Grant moved off the stage to intercept her, but Harold Bennett lifted one hand. "Let her through." 2 words from the chairman. And for the first time in years, someone more powerful than Grant refused to clear a path for his lie. Margaret reached Emily and placed the folder on the presentation table, beside the divorce papers Grant had wanted signed. Old paper beside new poison. Emily saw the seal clearly now, faded but unbroken. Whitaker Holdings Trust. Her father's initials were stamped beneath it. T.W. Grant stared at the folder like it had risen from a grave. His voice came out low. "That file has no legal standing." Margaret looked at him over the rim of her glasses. "Then you will not mind if the board sees it." A murmur ran through the ballroom. Phones rose higher. Somewhere near the bar, a reporter whispered, "Keep recording." Emily touched the silver locket at her throat, and the tiny hinge opened beneath her thumb with a click so soft only she could hear it. Inside was not a photograph, not a curl of hair, not a sentimental memory. It was a narrow black microchip, hidden behind velvet for almost 15 years. Her father had not left her jewelry. He had left her a lockpick for a stolen kingdom. Grant reached for the locket before he seemed to understand what he was doing. It was not violent. It was worse than that. It was familiar. The quick, entitled movement of a man who had spent years taking papers from Emily's hands, words from her mouth, rooms from under her feet. Emily stepped back before his fingers touched the silver chain. A soft gasp moved through the nearest tables. Grant froze, then smiled for the cameras as if he had only been adjusting the air between them. "Emily," he said, "careful now, polished now. You are tired. This is not good for you or the baby." There it was. The baby. The final door he always tried when every other lock failed. He lowered his voice, but the microphone still caught the edges. "Do not make me handle this through family court." The ballroom went quieter. Vanessa's eyes flicked toward him, warning him, but Grant was already sliding into the tone he used behind closed doors. "You know what the doctors said. Stress, anxiety, confusion. It would be very easy for people to believe you are not in a stable place to make decisions tonight." Emily felt the old fear rise, not like a scream, but like cold water around her ankles. He had rehearsed this for months. Small comments at dinner parties, careful jokes with investors, concerned updates to bored wives. Emily was emotional. Emily was fragile. Emily needed rest. By the time he needed to silence her, the room would already know its lines. Vanessa stepped beside him, softer, sweeter, more dangerous because she sounded almost kind. "No one wants to hurt you," she said. "And when the baby arrives, Grant and I will make sure everything is handled properly. The right home, the right schools, the right kind of stability." Emily stared at her. For a moment, the chandeliers blurred, and she saw the nursery at home instead. The half-painted wall, the small white crib still in pieces because Grant said he was too busy to assemble it. The stack of tiny cotton blankets Emily had folded alone at midnight while he took calls in the hallway, laughing too quietly with someone whose name he never said. Vanessa had stood in that nursery once, 3 weeks earlier, running one finger along the crib rail with a smile that made Emily's skin go cold. "Children need strong examples," she had said then, "not mothers who fall apart." That night, Emily had cried. In the bathroom with the faucet running so no one would hear her. Tonight, she did not cry. Tonight, she understood that Vanessa did not want the child because she loved family. She wanted the child because heirs were useful. A baby could soften a scandal. A baby could keep the Whitaker name under Grant's roof. A baby could become the final signature on a theft that started before Emily was old enough to defend herself. Margaret placed one steady hand over the blue folder. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "I would advise you to stop discussing custody in front of shareholders, journalists, and an open microphone." Grant's eyes cut toward the microphone. Too late. Several guests had already lifted their phones higher. Harold Bennett looked sickened. Emily saw his expression and wondered how many times good men had looked away because the lie was profitable. Grant leaned close again, his smile gone. "Walk with me," he whispered. "Now." "No," Emily said. The second no was easier than the first. It stood taller. Grant's face hardened, and for 1 second Emily saw the man her father must have seen too late. Not the intern, not the protege, not the grieving son figure at the funeral. Just hunger wearing a tuxedo. Vanessa touched Grant's sleeve, but Emily was already turning toward Margaret. "How much time?" she asked. Margaret checked the slim gold watch on her wrist. 9 minutes. 9 minutes until what? Harold asked. Margaret opened the folder. The old seal cracked softly, a small dry sound that somehow carried through the ballroom. "Until Thomas Whitaker's succession clause activates under the conditions Mr. Calloway triggered tonight." Grant laughed once, sharp and humorless. "That clause does not exist." Margaret removed the first page and laid it beside the divorce papers. "It exists. It was sealed. It was witnessed. And it was designed for exactly this kind of betrayal." Emily looked at the microchip resting in her palm, black against her skin, no bigger than a fingernail. So small, so quiet. 15 years of silence hidden inside something Grant had dismissed as a dead man's sentiment. The baby moved again, and Emily placed her free hand over her stomach. 4 years, she had thought survival meant keeping peace. Now she knew peace without truth was only another room he could lock from the outside. She lifted the microchip toward the projector dock on the presentation table, and every screen in the ballroom flickered. The screens went black first. Not off. Black. A clean, deliberate darkness that swallowed Grant's tribute video mid-smile and left the ballroom staring at its own reflection in the glassy panels. Then came a thin line of white text in the center of every screen. Whitaker Holdings Trust Archive. Access key accepted. Emily heard someone inhale near the front table. She could not tell whether it was Vanessa, Harold, or Grant. Maybe all three. The room that had been built to celebrate a millionaire suddenly felt like a courtroom waiting for the judge to enter. Margaret Ellis stood beside Emily, calm as a stone wall in winter, and placed a second document onto the table. For the record, she said, this archive was created by Thomas Whitaker on October 12, 2011, 63 days before his death. It contains his final trust amendment, a video statement, and a conditional succession clause. Grant shook his head, but the color had begun to drain from his face. That archive was never authenticated. Margaret looked at him. Because you reported it missing. A ripple passed through the crowd. Not loud. Worse. Controlled. The kind of sound people make when they realize they may have applauded the wrong man for years. Emily stared at the screen as the loading circle turned once, twice, 3 times. Her father's face appeared, older than she remembered from the photographs. Tired. His white shirt was open at the collar, his hair silver at the temples, his eyes steady in that quiet way that used to make employees tell the truth before he even asked a question. For a moment, Emily forgot the cameras, the papers, the divorce, the woman in red standing close to her husband. She was 19 again, standing in a garage that smelled like motor oil and printer toner, watching her father tape product sketches to the wall and call them impossible only until Monday. The video crackled, then his voice filled the ballroom. If this recording is being viewed, it means my daughter has found the key I left her. Emily's breath broke, but she held herself still. The baby moved under her palm. Thomas Whitaker continued. Emily, sweetheart, I am sorry I could not tell you everything while I was alive. I wanted to protect you from the ugliness inside business, but protection without truth can become another kind of harm. Vanessa's mouth tightened. Grant looked at the screen as if he could intimidate a dead man into silence. Thomas looked straight into the camera. Grant Calloway was granted temporary operational authority over Whitaker Labs under one condition only, that he preserve the trust, protect my daughter's majority interest, and never attempt to coerce, transfer, dilute, or conceal her inheritance. Harold Bennett slowly sat down, his hand covering his mouth. The older board members beside him exchanged looks that were not confusion anymore. They were memory. They had seen drafts. They had heard rumors. They had chosen convenience. Margaret opened another page and turned it toward the room. The trust names Emily and Whitaker as the sole controlling beneficiary of 61% of the voting shares. The sentence did not explode. It froze. 400 people, one silence. Then the phones lifted higher. Grant stepped forward. This is absurd. She was a teenager. She had no business capacity. I built this company. Thomas's recorded voice answered, as if he had been waiting 15 years for that exact lie. No executive, including Grant Calloway, may claim ownership through emergency stewardship. Stewardship is not inheritance. Access is not ownership. Trust is not a blank check. A sound came from the back of the room. Almost a laugh, almost a gasp. Emily did not look away from her father. On the screen, Thomas leaned closer. If Grant attempts to force Emily to surrender marital, custodial, or financial rights connected to this company, the succession clause activates immediately upon presentation of this archive to any sitting board chair or trust attorney. Margaret checked her watch again. 8:59. Grant turned sharply toward Harold. Do not listen to this. This is a family stunt. Harold looked at the divorce papers on the presentation table, then at the microphone that had caught every threat, then at Emily's hand resting over her unborn child. Grant, he said quietly, you made it a board matter the moment you put her on that stage. The screens flickered again, shifting from Thomas's face to scanned documents, signatures, dates, seals, shareholder schedules, certified witness statements. Each page appeared like another nail placed neatly into polished wood. Vanessa took one step back from Grant. Small, careful, public. Emily saw it and understood. Even loyalty had a market value in that room. Margaret slid the final page across the table toward Harold Bennett. At 9 o'clock tonight, under the founder's own terms, Mr. Calloway's temporary authority becomes reviewable by emergency vote. His voting privileges are suspended pending forensic audit. Emily Whitaker's controlling interest is restored. The clock on the screen changed. 9 p.m. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then every screen displayed one final line from the trust. Control reverts to the lawful heir. Grant stared at those words, and the empire he had stolen stopped recognizing his name. The first thing Grant lost was not the company. It was the room. Emily saw it happen in small, silent fractures. The head of legal stopped looking at him and started looking at Margaret. Two investors lowered their champagne glasses without taking a sip. A reporter near the back whispered into her phone, and the words "emergency board vote" traveled from mouth to mouth like a match finding dry paper. Grant turned in a slow circle, searching for the old obedience, the automatic nods, the fearful smiles, the people who had built their careers around agreeing with him before he finished speaking. But the gala had changed shape. The stage was no longer his monument. It was evidence. "This is theater," Grant said, forcing a laugh that arrived too late and died too quickly. All of it. A grieving daughter, an old attorney, a conveniently discovered archive. Do you really think a sentimental video can undo 15 years of leadership? Margaret did not raise her voice. She did not need to. No, Mr. Calloway. The video does not undo it. The trust does. The archive confirms it. Your own conduct activates it. Harold Bennett rose again, slower this time, as if every joint in his body carried the weight of what he had failed to stop. Margaret, are the emergency provisions valid under New York law? Yes, Margaret said. Filed, witnessed, and sealed. Copies were held by the trust office, the founder's private counsel, and one independent fiduciary in Boston. Grant's head snapped toward her. Who? Margaret opened the briefcase and removed a cream envelope. You will meet him during the audit. That was the moment Vanessa made her mistake. She stepped to the microphone with a smile too bright for the room she was standing in. Everyone, please. This company cannot be handed to a pregnant housewife because of some old family drama. The words barely left her mouth before the room turned on her. Not loudly, not with outrage, with recognition. The kind that comes when cruelty accidentally says what power has been thinking all along. Emily looked at Vanessa, and for the first time that night, she did not feel smaller beside her. Vanessa had diamonds, Grant's arm, the red dress, the confidence of a woman who believed proximity to power made her powerful. But she did not have the documents. She did not have the name. She did not have the child who had just moved beneath Emily's hand, as if listening. I am not asking anyone to hand me anything, Emily said. Her voice was still quiet, but now the whole ballroom leaned toward it. I am asking this board to stop protecting what was taken. Harold looked down at the papers Margaret had placed before him. Mr. Calloway, he said, until the board reviews these materials, I am calling an immediate recess of the gala program and convening an emergency session. Grant's expression sharpened. You do not have that authority. Harold met his eyes. According to the bylaws your office circulated last quarter, I do. A murmur moved across the room, sharper this time. Grant had been trapped by his own paperwork. For years, he had rewritten rules to concentrate power around himself, never imagining they could be turned like a key in another hand. He moved toward Harold, stopping just short of the board table. Think very carefully, he said. Every person in this room owes their wealth to me. Harold's face tightened. No, Grant. Many of us owe our silence to you. That is not the same thing. The sentence landed with such cold force that even Vanessa looked away. Emily felt Margaret's hand briefly touch her elbow, not to steady her, but to remind her she was not standing there alone. On the screens, the tribute video had been replaced by the trust documents. Page after page. Dates, clauses, signatures. Thomas Whitaker's name clear at the bottom of each one. Then another file opened. Emily did not expect it. Neither did Grant. A spreadsheet appeared with transfers marked in red, shell companies, consulting fees, internal loans, asset movements routed through subsidiaries Emily had never heard of. Margaret's voice cut through the growing noise. The archive also contains a preliminary asset map prepared by Thomas Whitaker before his death. It appears Mr. Whitaker suspected improper movement of company property before the accident. Grant's face changed. Not fear exactly. Calculation. Fast, ugly, exposed. Vanessa whispered, Grant, what is that? He did not answer her. Emily saw then that Vanessa had known about the affair, the humiliation, maybe even the pressure campaign. But not this. Not the old theft beneath the new one. That was Grant's private altar. He had never shared the first sin. Margaret clicked to the next document. An email draft from Thomas Whitaker appeared on screen, addressed to Margaret Ellis, subject line, If anything happens to me. Emily's throat closed. The room blurred at the edges. Her father's words filled the screen, brief and plain. Grant is moving too quickly. I may have trusted ambition and mistaken it for gratitude. If I am wrong, burn this. If I am right, protect Emily. The ballroom became so silent that Emily could hear the soft hum of the projector above them. Grant looked at the message, then at Emily, and for the first time all night, he stopped performing. No smile. No charm. No concerned husband. Mask. Just a man staring at the locked door of his own making. Emily placed the microchip on the table beside the divorce papers. You wanted my signature tonight, she said. Now you have my answer. Her answer did not sound like revenge. That was what made it dangerous. It did not shake. It did not plead. It did not ask the room to pity her. It simply stood there, clean and immovable, beside the documents Grant had spent 15 years pretending did not exist. Harold Bennett looked toward the other board members seated near the center aisle. Emergency session begins now, he said. All directors present will remain. Legal counsel will record. Security will secure the exits for documentation purposes only. No one is being detained, but no company materials leave this room. Grant's laugh came back, thinner now. You are turning an anniversary gala into a circus. No, Harold said. You did that when you brought divorce papers to the podium. The sentence cracked through the ballroom like a gavel. A few people gasped. Someone near the back said, Oh my God, under their breath. Vanessa reached for Grant's hand, but he pulled away without looking at her. That small movement told Emily more than any confession could. Vanessa had been useful when she made him look desired. She was less useful now that the room smelled liability on her perfume. Margaret opened a secure tablet and connected it to the presentation system. The board should see the full ownership chain, she said. Not the version Mr. Calloway filed after the founder's death. The original. On screen, a chart appeared. Whitaker Holdings at the top. Emily and Whitaker beneath it. 61% voting control. Then a dotted line marked temporary stewardship. Grant Calloway. Operational authority only. The words were plain. Almost boring. That was the beauty of truth when it finally arrived. It did not need music. It did not need chandeliers. It only needed to be read aloud in a room where lies had grown expensive. Emily watched Grant stare at the chart, and for the first time she noticed how young his anger made him look. Not powerful, not brilliant, just a boy caught with his hand in a locked drawer, furious that the drawer had remembered its owner. I built the revenue, he said. I took a failing lab and made it national. Without me, this company would have died. Margaret clicked once. The screen changed to a timeline. Patent renewals signed by Thomas Whitaker before his death. Federal grants secured before Grant's takeover. Early supplier contracts negotiated by Whitaker Labs. Insurance proceeds rerouted after the accident. Bridge loans issued under emergency control. Emily saw the pattern form in front of everyone. Grant had not built from nothing. He had inherited momentum, buried the source, and charged admission to the funeral. Harold removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Why was this not disclosed during the merger review, he asked. The head of legal, a narrow-faced man named Peter Sloan, swallowed hard. We relied on Mr. Calloway's certification. Meaning? Harold asked. Meaning he signed that the trust claims had been resolved. Margaret turned another page. They were not resolved. They were concealed. The ballroom murmured again, and this time the sound did not fade quickly. It grew legs. It moved through donors, spouses, executives, waiters holding untouched trays. Vanessa stepped back another inch, almost behind a floral arrangement. Emily saw it and thought of every woman who had ever borrowed a man's cruelty and called it status. The cameras followed Vanessa anyway. There was no pretty angle left. Grant suddenly pointed at Emily. Ask her what she knows about running a company. Ask her. She spent years avoiding board meetings, charity lunches, investor calls. She does not know the first thing about operations. The old Emily would have flinched. The old Emily would have explained that he had blocked her calendar, withheld reports, told staff not to copy her on emails because pregnancy and stress were too much, because grief was too much, because being a wife was enough. But the new Emily did not chase dignity from someone who had stolen it for sport. She stepped closer to the microphone. "You are right," she said. Grant blinked, surprised by the admission. Emily continued, "I do not know how to hide assets through shell vendors. I do not know how to forge emotional concern into legal pressure. I do not know how to take a dead man's trust and call it ambition." The phones rose again. A reporter whispered, "Did you get that?" Emily turned from Grant to the board. "But I know who my father was. I know what he built. And I know enough to bring in people who are not afraid of an audit." Margaret clicked again. A new slide appeared. Independent forensic review team, pre-authorized by Whitaker Holdings Trust. At the bottom was a Boston law firm, a national accounting group, and a retired federal corporate fraud investigator. Harold read the names, then looked at Grant. "This was ready?" Margaret nodded. Thomas Whitaker prepared safeguards. Emily chose to activate them tonight. Grant looked at Emily then, really looked at her, not as a wife, not as an obstacle, not as a woman he thought he could manage with a check and a threat. He looked at her as the lawful heir, and the room saw him see it. Emily placed one hand on the table, steadying herself as the baby shifted. "I did not come here to beg for a seat," she said. "I came to take back the chair my father never gave you." Harold lifted the emergency resolution. All directors in favor of suspending Grant Calloway's executive authority pending audit and restoring voting recognition to Emily Whitaker under the trust, say aye. For one breath, the ballroom was a held match. Then Harold said, "Aye." One by one, the board followed. "Aye, aye, aye, aye." Each word removed another brick from Grant's empire. By the time the final vote was recorded, the chandeliers were still shining, the champagne was still cold, and Grant Calloway was no longer chief executive officer. The vote did not end the night. It opened it. For 3 seconds after the final aye, the ballroom stayed perfectly still, as if every person inside it needed time to understand that power could change hands without a shout, without a fight, without a man's permission. Then Harold Bennett turned to the head of security and gave one quiet instruction. "Deactivate Mr. Calloway's executive access." Grant's face went blank. Not angry now. Blank. The kind of blank that comes before. A man discovers how much of his identity was stored in badges, passwords, reserved elevators, and people too frightened to say no. Across the room, a security director touched his earpiece. Somewhere beyond the ballroom, systems began closing around Grant like doors in a long hallway. His office keycard, his private garage pass, his encrypted company phone, his authority to approve transfers, his signature rights on corporate accounts. One by one, invisible locks stopped knowing him. On the screen, Margaret displayed a live compliance notice from the company's internal governance platform. Executive authority suspended. Forensic preservation active. Data deletion lock enabled. The words were small, administrative, almost dull, but they cut cleaner than any speech. Grant stepped toward Harold. "You cannot do this in front of employees." Harold looked at him with a sadness that had finally outgrown fear. "You did this in front of employees." A low sound passed through the room, not applause, not laughter, something sharper. Recognition. Vanessa reached for her clutch on the cocktail table beside her. Margaret saw it immediately. "Ms. Rhodes," she said, "please leave all company devices where they are." Vanessa froze with one hand inside the bag. "Excuse me. Your company laptop, phone, and tablet are subject to preservation," Margaret said. "You served as chief communications officer during the period under review." Vanessa's eyes flashed. "I did public relations. I did not touch finance." Margaret clicked to another slide. An email chain appeared, marked confidential, with Vanessa's name highlighted in yellow. Draft statement regarding Whitaker family claims. Suggested language: unstable spouse, emotionally distressed, no operational role. Emily felt the room turn toward her, then toward Vanessa. That was the thing about lies written in corporate language. They still had fingerprints. Vanessa's perfect posture weakened by half an inch. "Grant told me legal approved that." Peter Sloan, the head of legal, looked down at the carpet. No rescue came. No one stepped between her and the screen. For once, her beauty had no jurisdiction. Grant turned on her with a look. So cold Emily almost pitted her. Almost. "Do not say another word," he hissed. But the microphones were still open. The phones were still recording. The gala was no longer a private event. It had become a public record wearing a black tie. A reporter near the back spoke just loud enough for her live stream to catch it. "Viewers are watching the apparent removal of Grant Calloway from Calloway Whitaker Industries after trust documents identified his pregnant wife as controlling heir." The phrase traveled faster than the waiters could clear the champagne. Within minutes, clips were online. Emily did not know that yet. She only knew the room kept brightening with phone screens. Margaret handed Harold the emergency resolution for signature. His pen moved slowly, deliberately, each stroke undoing years of convenience. Then she placed a second document beside it. "We are also requesting immediate preservation of all records related to asset transfers from Whitaker Labs, founder insurance proceeds, trust communications, and any marital settlement documents presented to Mrs. Whitaker." Grant's mouth tightened at Mrs. Whitaker, not Mrs. Calloway. Margaret had chosen every word like a locked box. "This is defamation," Grant said. "No," Emily replied. "This is discovery." It was the first time she had used the language of his world against him, and the effect was immediate. Several investors looked at one another. The chief financial officer stood from his table and quietly removed his company badge, placing it on the linen as if it had become hot against his chest. "For the record," he said, voice shaking, "my office will cooperate fully." That was when the first board member crossed the floor to Emily. Then another. Not to congratulate her. Not yet. To acknowledge her. One by one, people who had spent years walking past her at company events now stood before her like petitioners approaching the door they had mistaken for a wall. Grant watched them move, and something in him broke without sound. He reached for the divorce papers, perhaps to tear them, perhaps to hide them, perhaps only because they were the last piece of paper in the room still pretending he had control. Emily placed her hand over them first. "No," she said again. The third no was the softest. It was also the final one. Security approached Grant, not touching him, just standing close enough to make the message visible. He looked from Harold to Margaret to Vanessa, then finally to Emily. "You think you can run this?" he asked. Emily looked at the screens where her father's signature still glowed beneath the trust seal. Then she looked at the ballroom full of witnesses, at the board forced to remember, at the cameras that would carry the truth farther than Grant's money could reach. "No," she said. "I think I can rebuild what you stole." By the next morning, 20 million people would call it the inheritance speech that destroyed a thief. But in that moment, all Emily heard was the small, steady rhythm beneath her palm, the future refusing to be signed away. Grant did not walk out like a ruined man. Not at first. He straightened his tuxedo, lifted his chin, and crossed the ballroom with the same expensive posture he had practiced for years, as if dignity could be performed until people forgot the truth. But nobody clapped. Nobody followed. Nobody called him sir. The private elevator at the end of the marble hall would not open for his badge, and that was the image the cameras caught. Grant Calloway standing before closed silver doors, pressing a dead key card against a reader that no longer believed in him. Vanessa left through the side entrance 15 minutes later, carrying no company laptop, no company phone, and no promise from the man she had tried to replace Emily beside. The red dress still looked perfect, but her face did not. By midnight, the gala flowers were being cleared from the tables. The champagne had gone warm, and the name Calloway had already been removed from the company's internal portal. By morning, the story was everywhere. Not because Emily shouted, not because she begged, because she had stood 8 months pregnant beneath 400 witnesses and let the documents speak louder than every insult ever aimed at her. 20 million people watched the clip in the first 24 hours. Some called it the inheritance speech that destroyed a thief. Others called it the night a stolen company recognized its owner. Emily did not watch the videos. She spent the next morning in a quiet doctor's office, listening to her daughter's heartbeat echo through a small speaker, while Margaret Ellis sat nearby with a yellow legal pad and a cup of hospital coffee gone cold. "The board approved the forensic audit," Margaret said gently. "Grant's accounts are frozen pending review. The Boston fiduciary confirmed everything. Your father's trust held." Emily closed her eyes. For years, she had imagined justice would feel like fire. Instead, it felt like breathing after being underwater too long. 3 months later, on a clear spring morning in Albany, Emily returned to the original Whitaker building with her newborn daughter asleep against her shoulder. The old sign had been restored. Whitaker Industries. No hyphen. No borrowed name standing in front of her father's. Employees lined the lobby, not cheering wildly, not turning the moment into a spectacle, just standing. The kind of silence that knows when applause would be too small. Harold Bennett waited near the elevator with his resignation letter in one hand and tears in his eyes. "I should have asked more questions," he said. Emily looked at him for a long moment. Then she took the letter, folded it once, and placed it inside her bag. Then asked better ones now. That was how she led. Not by humiliating people for yesterday's cowardice, but by making tomorrow's courage non-negotiable. The audit uncovered years of hidden transfers, false certifications, and pressure campaigns disguised as corporate strategy. Grant lost the mansion, the board seat, the private jet membership, the magazine covers, and finally the company he had treated like a mirror. The criminal case would take time. The civil case would take longer. But the tower downtown changed its sign in a single afternoon, and sometimes justice begins with a name put back where it belongs. Emily turned the top-floor office into a nursery-friendly executive suite, not because she needed to prove motherhood and power could coexist, but because she refused to separate the future from the work of protecting it. On her desk, she kept three things: the silver locket, her father's first patent sketch, and the unsigned divorce papers Grant had tried to make her sign under the lights. Not as trophies, as reminders. A thief can steal doors, titles, and years, but not the moment a woman remembers she was never the guest in her own life. Some men steal a company to feel powerful, then lose it the moment a woman remembers her name. And if this story made you angry, proud, or quietly relieved, tell me in the comments which moment stayed with you the most. Because sometimes the strongest justice is not revenge, it is watching the truth finally stand up in a room full of witnesses. Thank you for watching until the end.